Hello everyone and welcome to this month's masterclass, which is all about your diet. I am going to wait just a minute or so to see if anyone joins in, and then we will get cracking. Hi Amy, welcome. It's going to be an exciting session. I've been playing around with the structure as well, so if you're used to coming to these masterclasses, hopefully this will be a slightly more synergistic one. Right, okay, so yes, today's session is all about your diet. Yep, in one of these quick fire situations, I'm going to try and attempt to explain and apply personalised nutrition for you all, so you can then go away and ensure that your individual choices about your eating regime is covering all of your requirements. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to zip through the fundamentals, and then I'm going to actually pay most of my attention to a selection of the most popular dietary structures, because they give the kind of perfect context for me to explain where and how we might need to fill in the gaps. I've picked, personal choice, paleo, vegan, and then different types of fasting as my main examples, because I think they offer a good breadth of insight, so hopefully you'll agree. A few specific questions have already come in, so I'm going to slot those answers into the session if they kind of fit nicely, and then I've also just got a Q&A bit at the end. But obviously if you have any thoughts or anything that pops up along the way, pop them in the box, and I'm also going to try and take pauses, if I remember, to answer questions throughout. But anything that needs clarification, extra explanation, just ask. So, what is a good diet? What actually is it? It's a question I often get asked, and over time I've come to rest on a few key summary points. So, to start off with, it's a routine centered around nourishment, not numbers. And I don't just mean not calorie counting or thinking about a numerical weight on a scale. I mean a routine that provides true freedom to eat in a way that is beneficial to your body, makes you feel good in yourself, and doesn't require military level precision or attention. And this is in a general sense, because obviously I work with therapeutic diets, so I'm talking about people who aren't adapting their dietary choices for a specific medical requirement at that point in time. It's also transferable to different situations, such as traveling or eating out. But because you've nurtured your body to be functioning at its optimal level all the time, you have total tolerance to those kind of things, because you can absorb the differences without having any kind of negative side effects. Or, that, for example, if you're used to eating a very fiber-rich diet, you might take some additional soluble fiber with you if you're traveling somewhere where you're not going to have access to as much veg as you would need. But that's kind of the idea. I also think your diet should be something that provides you with feedback. If you're truly eating in tune with your metabolic needs, you'll be able to read and understand messages that your system then sends you if something isn't right or it's not suiting you. And that could be as simple as switching the order of your meal weighting. And I mean when in the day you eat your largest meal, depending on the season. Is that something you've ever thought about? Because it's actually quite a significant thing that can really make a huge difference to how you feel. Because obviously the environment of summer versus winter is entirely different. And that can impact how, when, what you would want to be eating. That level of nuance might sound a little bit far-fetched to some people, or like it should just be reserved for people like me who have a super in-depth knowledge of nutrition. But I promise you it isn't. It's something that can take a little bit of time to get right, but after a while I usually find that my clients are doing it anyway. And I just kind of point out, it's like, oh, have you noticed that you started to do that? And they go, oh, I have. Didn't even think about it, because it's now just a natural thing that you do. Anyway, taking a step back to the more solid stuff now though, I've also got a few basic fundamentals that ring true whatever your dietary preference kind of lead you to. So these are: concentrate on real foods and cook from basic raw materials as much as you possibly can. Sounds quite simple, but I would also strongly encourage the avoidance of processed proteins wherever you can. So whether that's animal or plant-based versions, they'll always contain extra ingredients that we just don't want to be consuming. So this is a choice that you make when you're in charge of your food. And then, like I say, if you go out and you want to eat a little bit off-piste, then you've got total tolerance to that, but this is what you would do at home. For some, cooking from scratch can be soaking dried legumes overnight and then making their own hummus, or making their own bone broth, or meal prepping multiple components every weekend to sort them out over the course of the week. But for other people, it could be grabbing something like a bag of stir-fry veg, coming home at the end of the day, chucking it into a pan with this quick protein sauce, and then adding a handful of seeds at the end. Both versions are equally brilliant. and healthy eating should never be shrouded in some kind of veil of, if I'm not doing it perfectly, I'm failing, because you aren't. You're doing what you can do in a way that is practical for you, and that is absolutely fantastic, but you're still using those raw materials, which is what we were aiming for. Next one, think about your protein intake. In most cases, obviously I'll talk a little bit about different diets in a second, you want to be aiming for about 30 to 35 grams of protein minimum per meal to stabilize your blood sugar levels. If you don't know what that means in terms of a portion, literally just go and Google what does 30 grams of protein look like, and you'll pull up tables of lists and that kind of stuff. As a basic example, for fish and meat, it's usually around 100 grams will provide something like 28 to 35 grams of protein. So like 100 grams of beef is about a 30 gram portion, whereas about 110 grams of salmon is about 30 grams of protein. For plant-based foods, it'll be more, and you just have to be aware that they will naturally also contain more carbohydrate and sometimes have higher fat levels. But just go and have a look at those, and they're quite easy to kind of like pick out, and then you can go, oh, I'm definitely not eating that. And the one that I always like to point out to people is eggs, because a medium egg only contains 5.5 grams of protein, and 3 grams of that comes from the white. So if you're having 2 eggs for breakfast, you need an additional protein source in there as well to get anywhere near 30 to 35 grams of protein. That will make a huge difference. If you then start doing that with your breakfast, you'll actually feel much more satisfied and more stable in terms of your blood sugar and your energy levels over the course of the day. Right, okay, number 3. Think about diversity and variety of your plant-based ingredients. No one food is the answer. My goodness, there's no such thing as a superfood. And a limited diet, even if it's made up of like good ingredients as a fundamental, doesn't hit your nourishment target. It just doesn't do it. You want to be rotating through like veg, fruit, nuts, seeds, and then diet depending, whole grains and legumes as well on a weekly, monthly basis. And the easiest way I find to get people to do this is to eat seasonally, because that gives you overall rotation over the course of the year. And then I tend to think about like pantry staples. If you picked 1 grain, 1 pulse, 1 nut, 1 seed, and you bought one of each, and then the next time you bought them, you bought another one. And then gradually you start to mix them together. Over time, you'll get general diversity, but you don't need to go out and buy every single thing. And also things like herbs, dried spices, all that kind of stuff, they'll contribute too. And don't forget about frozen veg. I mean, even I sometimes will just go and bulk buy. I bought loads of swede recently because it was really cheap. So I now just have loads of chopped up swede in my freezer, which I can use to make soup and all of my store cans of leafy greens, all that kind of stuff. Just chuck them in the freezer and then use them over the period of time. And yeah. It's quite simple sort of stuff, basic things. Avoid processed foods. They aren't food. They contain sweeteners, preservatives, excess sodium, and other additives that muck up our brain chemistry, disrupt our hunger signaling, and also change our gut bacteria, just play havoc with them. Someone actually asked me what my top exclusion for gut health would be if I had to just pick one. And I think I would, yes, frozen edamame. Frozen edamame, brilliant. Sorry, I get distracted when people say things that are perfect. If I had to pick one thing, it would be artificial sweeteners like sucralose. I could have said coffee, because I just wanted to highlight how many people rely on the sort of spasmodic laxative style gastric irritant impacts of coffee to go to the toilet in the morning, which is not okay. If you need coffee to go for a bowel movement, there is something going on with your digestive health, so we need to talk about that. But anyway, I decided to land on sucralose and artificial sweeteners because they're a bigger issue for our long-term gut health. They really impact our microbiome. Some people will be better at metabolizing them than others, but there is always going to be some kind of impact on your microbiome if you're consuming those. And so we know that our microbiome is just proving itself time and time again to be one of the key foundations of optimal health long-term. So just don't play with them. Just let them do their thing, let them look after you. And stuff like sucralose is just not useful. There's also huge amounts of science about things like bone density being compromised, changes to hormone, like neurotransmitter stuff within the brain, and they're addictive. So yeah, don't do it. And then my last one of the basic fundamentals before we dive into the other bits are to be optimally hydrated, because water is key for all your metabolic processes, waste elimination, and a lot more. And our bodies are 60% water. Plus, then if we think that like naturally an adult should produce about 3 to 4 litres of gastric secretions per day, stuff like your stomach acid, you need to be drinking enough. Otherwise, there's just no way that your body can do what it needs to be doing. And functional dehydration is something I see a lot in people. So also check that your electrolyte levels are at a suitable level too. and you're not just overly diluted and you've got lots of water but not enough salts to tell the water where to go. Right, they're the basics. Does anyone have any questions about that, or are we fine to zone through? Somebody very cleverly popped frozen edamame in as a really good option to have in your freezer. Fantastic as a snack, super handy, chuck them into any meal, munch them, delicious, absolutely love them. Okay, don't think anyone has any questions. So let's zone in on dietary structures. There's been a general move, or maybe we just call it like an increased awareness of how certain foods impact our health and well-being. And I would say over the last couple of decades, I mean, it's been there for longer, but the idea has become a little bit more mainstream recently. And it's sort of led to the evolution of more exclusionist regimes, which can be of great benefit if done well. But they also need consideration, as when you sort of take anything out, you then need to make sure all your requirements are still covered. Okay, quick question. Salts in the body, how do I ensure I'm getting enough? So the quickest way to tell if your electrolytes are sort of in balance are to think about things like if you get headaches, if you get any muscular cramping, if you get any eye twitching. If you're drinking plenty of water but you feel like you're thirsty or you have a dry mouth, then you would need to be adding in more electrolytes, because that's the idea of functional dehydration. You're wetting the membrane in your mouth, but the water isn't moving where it should be going. I tend to use, there we go, the Elite drops, just add them into water. And if you do filter your water, which I know a lot of people are now doing more of because they're aware of the stuff that we get in our water, you then do need to add electrolytes back in, because you are removing impurities and toxins, but you're also taking out mineral salts. So this is what I would use. Add it into your water. If you start to notice, their stated dose I think is 16 to 20 drops per litre. If you start to notice a salty flavour, then you just halve the dose. But yeah, that would be the way that I would check it out. They're my kind of like top things. Dizziness, sort of low blood pressure as well. They're all kind of indications. And reactive high blood pressure. If you're on, unless you've been medically told to be on a low salt diet, where there are situations like that, and you aren't using any salt at all within your routine, and you find you get reactive high blood pressure. So say, for example, when you stand up, your blood pressure shoots up and then kind of comes down again. That can also be a sign that your body's trying to compensate. So they would be a few instances. What is it called? Do you mean the electrolyte complex? It's called Elite. I'll tag it in the comments. So they're just simple, pure. There's nothing else in them. They also have a citrulite, which has got a little bit of citric acid in it. It has a slight lemony flavour, but they're all completely natural, no sweeteners, no flavours, nothing in there. So go and check them out. You can also find Viridian do a dropper bottle, and there are some other ones which are kind of powder versions. Just be careful of the ones that say they're alkalizing, because sometimes they don't actually contain the full breadth. They have like more magnesium, which again is good, but at the same point, if you need more sodium, it's not going to help resolve the overall balance. Right, onwards we travel. So yes, we're going to go into dietary structures, and we're going to start with the paleo diet, which is based on types of foods presumed to have been eaten by early humans, consisting mainly of meat, fish, vegetables, nuts, seeds, eggs, and fruit, and then eliminating dairy, cereals, and all processed foods. So off the bat, I like a paleo diet if done well. It's easy to maintain and transferable, as someone is just basically looking to pair good quality protein with diverse veg and a natural fat source to compose a lovely balanced meal. The only limitations that I can sometimes find are the necessity for really good digestive function, and that they might need to keep an eye on their relative fibre balance, because without grains, you can lack a little bit in soluble fibre and then have sort of like a relatively abundant insoluble fibre intake, which can then sort of make them a little bit sluggish in terms of their bowels, or a little bit uncomfortable, a bit fermenty. Also, because protein and insoluble fibre, so the stuff in like husky grains, your dark leafy greens, they need really robust stomach acid to break them down. And the most common modern day fly in the ointment when it comes to digestion is stress and poor sleep. So both of those lessen digestive efficacy, which can then mean that although the ancestral style diets are in essence wonderfully nutrient dense, the humans of today might not be able to access those bits quite as well as our ancestors would have done. So that can actually lead to what we sort of call functional insufficiencies. So this could be something like a dipping energy level, cravings for sweets after meals, reflux, poor hair quality, bloating, constipation, and gas. And if someone is on a paleo diet and they aren't a fish fan, they'd also need to watch out for their iodine levels and their omega-3 status. As without things like dairy, there might be insufficient in their iodine intake, and without small oily fish, then their omega-3 might be relatively low compared to their omega-6. So just kind of looking out for those. I personally suggest supporting your digestive efficacy, so your stomach acid production, by having apple cider vinegar before your meals or alongside your meals, and then adding in additional magnesium and vitamin C as the LLM1 and LVC2 twice a day to support stress hormone balance and enhance your sleep. So you can do them alongside meals or you can have them separately, but I would definitely put a dose in with your evening meal or just before bed to make sure that you are detoxifying things like your cortisol overnight and you are enhancing a really good quality sleep, because that helps with overall stuff. I'd then also probably add in the LLO1, so the omega-3, and LLP1, LLP1 for iodine if somebody isn't going to be quite active about adding in something like sea vegetables or seaweed within their routine. You don't need loads of those, but you would need to be having a couple of doses quite solidly each week if you aren't having dairy and you aren't eating any fish or shellfish. So they would just be a couple of things then. With simple tweaks like that, those issues usually resolve for somebody within 2 to 4 weeks, because as a basic thing, the paleo diet is very nutrient dense if done really well. It's just about making sure that functionally you can access those nutrients. So here it's less about nutrient holes and more about accounting for environmental burden. So that was that first example. Any questions at that stage? Anyone want to ask me anything before we dive on? Next, we're going to veganism. So get ready. No? Okay, right. So comparing vegan to paleo, this does leave quite significant. Unless medically required, should we incorporate all food groups in our diets? I personally do not eat red meat, but I do have everything else. No is the answer. So this is the idea about your diet reflecting you in every way. So it needs to be something that you enjoy eating. It needs to be something that nourishes you. And it needs to be something easy. So if you don't enjoy eating red meat, absolutely fine to leave it out, as long as you make sure that you are getting adequate iron in your diet. I'm going to talk about overall deficiencies that might flag up and signs and symptoms of those. But as an example, some people just don't suit grains. They don't sort of specifically follow a paleo diet, but they just don't enjoy grains, or their blood sugar is very reactive to those forms of carbohydrates. Similarly, some people will just not be able, however much work they do on their guts, to adequately break down things like chickpeas. They just don't suit them. Their microbiome doesn't love them and they feel uncomfortable as a result. So it's more about making sure that you have diversity in your routine. And if you see that there is a very big hole, because as I'm going to talk about with veganism, if you exclude a complete food group, you need to make sure that you're putting something in somewhere else. I guess a basic example of these would be something like if you were dairy free. Not because you're going to lack in calcium necessarily, unless you didn't eat anything else that contained calcium. So you'd want things like tahini or soy or green leafy vegetables in there, which I hope other people would eat. But it's more that things like your fermented dairy would also provide all of your lactobacillus for your microbiome. So are you making sure that you are having something like sauerkraut instead? Switch and swap. We don't need everything, we just need diversity. I hope that sort of answers your question. Right, going back to veganism, which does leave significant nutritional holes because it eliminates such a large swathe of foods. I'm absolutely not against vegan diet in essence, but my clarification is you cannot be a lazy vegan because you will end up with issues. If you're omnivorous, you obviously have a lot more to prop you up, but if you are limiting yourself in terms of what you're eating, you need to have all eyes on the ball, because otherwise something's going to fall off. There's also a key point to raise when it comes to vegan diets, that some people just will not suit them because of their genetics. Plant-based nutrients like calcium, or plant-based versions of nutrients like calcium and iron, although easy to consume on a vegan diet, still require conversion to their active forms, which are the ones that you'd get in an omnivorous diet. And for some people, those enzymatic processes just don't work effectively enough. Either they're completely limited or they might just be really slow. And so if that person is only getting those nutrients from those sources in their diet, it might not be enough and they will quite easily fall into deficiency. So it brings me onto another question, what are the most common nutrients missing from a healthy vegan diet? And I just want to clarify that the nutrients don't need to be missing from a vegan diet to be an issue. It can, again, just be that they are inaccessible to the person eating them. So Quick fire round on these. B12 is only available from animal foods. Plant-based versions are an analog. What is wrong with my voice? Analog form, which means they mimic the chemical structure, but it's like having a key that goes into a lock and then can't turn. They basically just block the receptors and they don't have the impact that you want them to. So things like B12, spirulina, they aren't B12 sources. You would have to supplement an active B12 form if you were vegan. There is a bit of noise within research that chlorella might have a minor active B12 action, but it's going to be such a small amount for the amount of chlorella you'd actually have to consume. I would never say to somebody that they can rely on chlorella as their sole B12 source. So I would use the LVB1 ongoing at the stated dose on the bottle, unless somebody was noted as being deficient when they did a blood test, in which case I would double their dose for about 4 weeks and then retest them. As a standing point, if you are vegan, there are a couple of things that you should test for probably once or twice a year, and they would be B12, iron, and B9. Is chlorella active? Chlorella is, well, this is what I was saying. We don't know. There are people who are saying yes, there are people who are saying no, but for the quantity that you would have to consume to get all of the B12 that you would require, you would be having bags of the stuff. And we know that solely having that amount of one nutrient is never good, or that food is never going to be good, because it might start to negatively impact other parts of the kind of web that is going on with your metabolism. So I would say add it in, consider it a top up, but don't consider it your like fail safe in terms of B12 if you are vegan. B12 then actually ties in well with iron for a couple of reasons. Firstly, non-heme iron is notoriously badly absorbed and levels are much lower in plant foods than animal versions. Secondly, B12, iron and folate all kind of work together in a little trifecta. And so somebody who's on a very healthy vegan diet might be doing their absolute best and supplementing B12, but then actually mask a low iron level as a result. So this is why I say that you need to test for them all ongoing. So in addition to using the LVB1, I would also use the LLF1, which is the methylfolate, so they can all work together, and keep an eye on your iron levels, and definitely avoid things like iron uptake inhibitors. You can find a full list if you Google them, but things like tea, coffee, red wine, green tea, pomegranate, grapes, don't have those alongside your iron-rich foods. But do add plenty of vitamin C, whether it's tomatoes, parsley, lemon juice, anything like that, because that will aid iron uptake. But again, if you are somebody who is feeling fatigued, maybe a little bit pale, maybe your hair isn't as good as it was before, or you're feeling sort of slightly tired or out of breath when you're exerting yourself, go and get an iron check, and it might be that you need to add in a little bit of a supplement, especially for women. Could be just that you need like a little pulse around your period, and then the rest of the time you're fine. It's just you're going through quite a lot of iron loss once a month and you're not able to top yourself quite as much as you would need to at that point. You also want to be aware that serum iron shouldn't just be tested for on its own, because that's just your circulating level. You also want to know what's going on with your ferritin, which is your stored iron, because if your ferritin is on the floor but you have an okay serum iron level, you've got enough for that day. But what if you get a cold or something else comes along? You won't have anything to support you in your kind of back pantry. So it's really important to make sure that your ferritin is also really optimal, as well as your serum iron. As a general point, phytic acid is something to be aware of, as it's pretty omnipresent in a vegan diet, and it's a thing that's found in the outer coating of nuts, seeds, grains, pulses, legumes, all that kind of stuff. It's there to protect the inner seed from things like the digestion of animals, weather, all that kind of stuff, so that it doesn't get destroyed as it gets transported somewhere to then grow. But we find it notoriously difficult to break down. It's one of the components that can lead to kind of gas and bloating when people transfer over to a vegan diet, but it is also a nutrient blocker. And if you're having it in large quantities, then things like calcium, zinc, iron, and magnesium really need to be kept an eye on, because that can be one of the main causes of functional deficiency on a really good vegan diet, because they'll be eating all of those wonderful natural foods, but actually they're not really getting access to the nutrition that they need to be getting to. The way that you get rid of phytic acid is to soak and sprout those nuts, seeds, grains, pulses, legumes. One of the ways that I speed up that process is to use a pressure cooker. So if you soak your beans, pulses, whatever they are, in water with a little bit of vinegar for as long as you possibly can, then give them a really good rinse and pressure cook them for about 15 to 20 minutes, you will decrease the phytic acid content as much as you possibly can, and also then you can activate your own nuts and seeds or buy brands such as like Eat Boundless, which already have done them for you. So if that's sort of what you are relying on, and you're just noting those kind of things, then I would look at the phytic acid content of your diet overall, just as a general point. Omega-3 and calcium. Chucked these on at the end because they kind of come down to that genetic predisposition as to whether the plant forms can be converted to fit somebody's individual needs. So generally omega-3 is lower in plant-based foods than in animal versions, and you would then need to convert the plant-based forms into the active forms. The enzyme that does that is inhibited by omega-6, and omega-6 is omnipresent in vegan diets because it comes, again, nuts and seeds, olive oil, that kind of stuff. So if you don't want to supplement omega-3, you would need to be making sure that you're having probably 2 to 4 tablespoons of organic cold-pressed hemp seed oil, or you could use flaxseed oil, but it's very volatile and vulnerable to oxidation, so you need to keep it in the freezer. But you need to be doing that daily. You'd also then need to add things like hulled hemp seeds and that kind of stuff into your routine, but you can't rely on the seed versions because the fibre gets in the way and you won't get a therapeutic level of the oil to bring your omega-3 status up. So I would say that supplementing omega-3 on a vegan diet is pretty integral. And again, I would use the LL01, and I'd probably give somebody who is vegan a double dose. So I'd give them 2 teaspoons per day just to make sure that their omega-3 influx balances the relative abundance and omnipresence of omega-6 within their diet. It would also then mean that if you do that, you're actually enhancing their own metabolic ability to convert the natural omega-3 in their diet to the active forms. I hope that makes sense. Same is true with sort of calcium, but if you're having options like green veg, tahini, natural soy like edamame, or 100% organic soy milk, then you probably won't find that supplemental calcium is required. I actually think, in fact, I probably find more omnivores who are deficient in calcium than vegans as a standing point. Can we overdo omega-3? It's very difficult to. I've never seen anybody who's actually got their omega-3 ratio as a 1-to-1 to omega-6. You can do a blood spot test to see what your omega-3 ratio is, but the average is about 30-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, whereas we want it closer to 1-to-1. So no, as a standing point, unless you're on an anticoagulant, you wouldn't then want to add in loads of omega-3 because it will enhance that action, because omega-3 in itself is an anticoagulant, and you can find that then obviously somebody might have a clotting issue. But no, I would say as a standing point, you can't really do omega-3, overdo omega-3. Okay. Oh, I had 2 more actually for vegans. Let's have a look at these. So carnosine and creatine. So protein is an ongoing question with a vegan diet, but if you work on the basis of ensuring good quality natural proteins in each meal, varying between them, and then maybe supplementing by adding in, my ratio is omega-3 5-to-1 according to Chronometer. Is this too much? That's not your omega-3 status though. So you would need to actually check your blood through a blood test to see, because when it comes to those things, it's probably not actually correct. I wouldn't rely on that if it was me. Right, okay, going back to my carnosine and my creatine. So you could also supplement your diet with something like a really good quality protein powder. Then that's fine in terms of protein intake. Sorry, 1 second. The basic ratio that I always try and get people to learn if they are trying to create complete proteins on a vegan diet is whole grains plus legumes, beans, pulses, or nuts and seeds. That gives you a full essential amino acid complement. So that, in essence, should give you all of the basic building blocks in terms of your protein intake. It's just about whether you're actually getting adequate portion sizes to achieve the amount of protein that you would need per day based on your body weight and your activity level. Is hemp protein powder okay? Yes, absolutely love hemp protein powder. I always say that I prefer plant-based protein powders to be rotated or at least mixed. So if you're saying that hemp protein powder comes from the seed family, would you then also look at doing something like a bit of pea protein mixed in? Or I actually really like the Motion Nutrition peanut butter one because it's a complement of peanut, sunflower, pumpkin, and something else. So it's a really good zinc source as well. But anyway, I quite like mixed protein powders when it comes to plant-based ones, just because then you get a better diversity. And the ones that sort of say, oh, it's a pea protein, therefore it's a complete protein profile, it might have detectable levels of some of those amino acids, but they aren't at what we would class as a complete protein level for you to only rely on that. If I undergo surgery, do I have to stop omega-3 supplements? Yes, absolutely you do. When you're undergoing surgery, you stop all of your supplements 7 days beforehand, and you don't resume them until you are back up and running. And if you are, it depends on what surgery you're having, but I would never suggest anybody re-add their supplements unless they are under the care of a physician who understands what they're taking, because also you'll come out from surgery, depending on what you've had done. Maybe they might still give you anticoagulants if you're not moving around so much. You might also be on other bits and pieces, antibiotics, that kind of stuff, painkillers. They can also impact things like liver function, so you wouldn't want to be adjusting liver function with any kind of herbs, because you can change the dosage of the pharmaceutical meds that you're having. So supplementing around surgery is quite a fine art. So I would definitely say nothing for a week before you go in. There are certain ones you can add back in quite soon after surgery, but I wouldn't do it unless you were sort of under the guidance of somebody who knows what they're talking about. Great. I'm glad that you used the Motion Nutrition peanut as well. Good. Okay, I'm still trying to tell you about carnosine and creatine. So the thing about these two amino acids is they have key functions for the muscular and nervous systems to support things like cognition, lean muscle mass, and blood sugar regulation. And they tend to be ones that you don't get from plant-based sources in abundant amounts. So for my vegan clients, I always use the LLC1, so the carnosine, 1 to 2 times a day, depending on their age and activity level. And then I also give them a baseline creatine intake of 3 to 5 grams per day, depending on muscle mass and activity level. Again, they're just a couple, if you are vegan, go and do a little bit of reading about them. They're quite interesting. And like I say, they're important for things like muscular recovery, cognitive function, all that kind of stuff. And also longevity, so preventing aging. So that'd be... I'm pretty sure is omega-3 a good idea? I'll talk to you about that specifically because there's a little bit more nuance than that. But yes, absolutely. If you DM me afterwards, then I can give you a little bit more specific guidance on that. Okay. Fasting. Right, so this is a little bit of a different one. So the reason I wanted to touch on fasting is less to do with the nutritional side of things and more to do with what your body is going to be trying to do when you are limiting the time that you're eating and extending the time when you aren't. The basis of fasting is basically to allow a metabolic reset. For your digestive bacteria will take out their trash. Your liver has a good old party breaking things down. Your DNA replicates without distraction, that kind of thing. So all brilliantly wonderful longevity optimizing stuff. But what we then really want to do is kind of hone in on it, enhance it even further, or just make sure that we have all the elements readily available to support your body to be able to kind of do such things. And all of these are useful even if you're not fasting. And I would class a fast as even something like having an elongated break between dinner and breakfast. So if you can get 12 to 13 hours overnight, that's still fasting. So still things to think about. But okay, anyway. So this is when we look at antioxidants and nucleotides, which is where the LipoLife range just really comes into its own. And it's one of the reasons I first started using them as a clinician who's sort of very interested in things like stress response, longevity, the real kind of like complex, weird, chronic-y stuff. This is when we want to use these, as well as just optimizing body function. But that's why I sort of found LipoLife, however many years ago that was. Right, so I have picked a few of my favorite ones, and then I'm just going to run through sort of like why we would use them because of what they do. So the first one is LLN1, which is your nucleotide complex. And so nucleotides are little basic building blocks of DNA. So when you supplement them, you support optimal DNA regeneration, immune function, and nucleotide supplementation is associated with overall lowered disease risk. Because the thing about the body is when it's doing stuff over and over again, it can get distracted, it can become less efficient over time, and usually the reason we have an increase in chronic disease as our populations globally age is because our bodies just get tired. So supporting them generally with nucleotide supplementation is something that I do. I mean, I'm in my 30s and I take nucleotides every day. I plan to live until I'm 150. Maybe not quite, but at the same point, I don't want to be 85 and slightly falling apart. So nucleotides are a great one. LLN2 is actually NMN, which is nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is another nucleotide, but it's specifically shown to increase the synthesis of something called NAD+. And NAD is one of the key components of energy metabolism, and supplementing NMN is one of the ones that, if you've read any of the books about longevity, you can see it's really talked about. It reduces fatigue, increases muscular stamina, cognitive function, and it's shown to be protective against age-related metabolic slowing. So it's one of those ones that, again, you kind of put in and it stops that idea that, oh, I've got this because I'm getting older. Age is not an excuse for poor health. It's just showing that your body's getting less efficient. So dive in ahead of it and prevent that from happening. The LLG3, LLG4, they're both glutathione. They're at slightly different dosages. So because glutathione is a lovely sulfur-containing antioxidant, if you take it in the LLG4, it's a little bit punchy. As one of my friends recently said, he takes it every day because I got him actually hooked on the Life products when he had COVID, because I promised him that he'd be better in 2 days, and he was. But he classed it as tasting like a stinky drain. So if you don't like sulfury things, then you might want to go for the LLG3, which is a lower dose, but it's got a flavour to it. So it might make it easier for you. But glutathione is one of our master antioxidants, rich in lovely sulfur, so supports sulfation in the liver, and is one of the most well-evidenced protective inclusions for long-term health. It reduces oxidative damage to our tissues, improves insulin response, and can have beneficial effects for those people who have things like autoimmune issues, such as psoriasis and that kind of stuff. So are those both suitable for everyone? Yes, absolutely. There are no contraindications to any of the nucleotides, so you can use those on anybody. And then my last two there were the LLF1, so the methylfolate, and the LVC2 or LVC1, which is a liposomal vitamin C, because folate and vitamin C support overall liver detoxification. So as your body ramps up its natural waste management mechanisms, then supporting that with optimal cofactor levels is amazing. It means that you're just going to do all of those great things really speedily. The one thing that I would say is, if you are low in energy, don't just add B vitamins without checking what's going on, because a lot of the time you'll see adverts on the tube or somewhere saying, are you tired? Sorry, that was a dog. Are you tired? You should take iron. It's the same thing. Are you tired? You should just take B vitamins. You don't just want to ramp up production of energy. You want to know why the energy is low to start off with. So it might be that your CoQ10 is actually lower than it should be, or it could be your iron. So if you have a significant issue, go and do a blood test first and then start adding stuff in. If you're just fine tuning, then you can add them in without doing that test. Right, okay. So now I've got questions at the end. If anybody has any other questions, please think about them and ask away. So one of them was, what are the most common general deficiencies and how do they show up in everyday life? What a question. So my list is vitamin D, iron, vitamin C, vitamin K, magnesium, and zinc. They are the top ones that I tend to see as standard deficiencies, even in people who are eating well. So vitamin D is something that we need in quite significant quantities, and we spend more time indoors than we probably would like to. Depending on where you live, you might just not get adequate sun exposure. We've also, well, not so much now, but there was a period of time where we weren't traveling as much, so people weren't getting out into the sun as much as they would be. And we're also much more aware of things like skin cancer. So we wear sunblock, we cover up, all of that kind of stuff. So we don't get good amounts of sun on our skin to produce that natural vitamin D. And it's a minority of people who join me in eating things like organ meats, which is pretty much the only source of bioavailable vitamin D from our diets. In terms of actually noticing that your vitamin D is low, vitamin D is required for so many different things. It often gets missed as the underlying reason for things. You need vitamin D to tie the cells of your intestines together. You need vitamin D for your immune function. You need vitamin D for your skin status, for your hair status. So if you overall feel like you're not doing particularly well, add vitamin D to your list of things that you're going to get on a blood spot check. You can do all of those at-home finger prick tests. They all cover vitamin D and they're pretty cheap, so just keep tabs on it. And if you live anywhere that isn't the equator, you will need to take vitamin D at some point during the year. I always sort of say, so that people can interpret them themselves, you want to be looking at a functionally optimal vitamin D level of something between about 85 to 120 nanomoles per litre. Again, genetics come into play here because some people, if they have done genetic testing, will find that they are either poor uptakers or have insensitive receptors for vitamin D, which would mean that they actually need to have a higher circulating level to affect the same change as somebody who doesn't have an issue with vitamin D sensitivity. But yes, so that's vitamin D. Iron, this can show up as pallor, breathlessness, poor tolerance to exercise, poor hair, poor skin, tiredness, really kind of, especially if you are a woman with a menstrual cycle, really, really dropping off after you have your period and feeling really, really low as well, like low mood. That can all be signs of low iron status, so definitely get that one checked. Vitamin C. Vitamin C is really important, obviously, for things like our immune function, but it's also integral for the integrity of our capillary walls. So the little minor blood vessels that come to the surface of our skin. So low vitamin C status can often result in poor collagen, so loss of skin elasticity, but very easy bruising and poor wound healing. So if that's something that you've noticed, then I'd be thinking about adding in the liposomal vitamin C, either the LVC1 or the LVC2. If it's a really big issue for you, then add in 3 doses per day, 1 teaspoon with every meal, and then you can go down to doing 2 doses and then 1 dose per day. But also if you have poor tolerance to infection, if you are that person who is like a sponge when anyone gets sick and you just can't shake stuff, again, vitamin C would be something that I'd be looking at, but I'd also keep in the back of my mind vitamin D and iron. I noted vitamin K after vitamin C, just because vitamin K is also to do with coagulation. So when I mentioned the idea of easy bruising or poor wound healing, if you find that you take the vitamin C, but you still get things like nosebleeds or lots of bruising, it could just be that your coagulation factors are a little bit low. And again, that can be something that's quite genetic. So then do also think about your vitamin K. What you could do is take so within the LiPLife range, if you want to be taking a vitamin D, there is LVD2. No, I get this wrong around. LVD1 is vitamin D and vitamin K together. So that's a standard maintenance dose that you could increase to a couple of pipettes per day to get you up into the optimal boundary. If your vitamin D is really low, you don't need to get to that loading dose. You won't need as much vitamin K. So it's actually better to take the isolated LVD2 at a loading dose, which is just vitamin D on its own, and then add 1 pipette of the LVK1, which is the vitamin K on its own. Or if you think that your vitamin D status is optimal and you've tried the vitamin C and you're actually worried about your vitamin K, then you can just use the LVK1 on its own, 1 pipette per day, and that should resolve things for you. Hope that made sense. Magnesium, again, is functionally deficient in a lot of people, and this is even those who eat really well, because we need it for so many different things. We use it in our nervous system, we use it in our digestive tract, we use it for liver detoxification, we use it for muscular relaxation, and our soils are naturally quite depleted in magnesium these days. So even if you're eating really good quality food, you might not be covering all of your bases when it comes to your magnesium status. So again, this can come up as muscular cramping, it might come up as headaches, it can come up as slow digestive function, it can come up as fatigue. If any of those things ring true, magnesium is something that you can't overdose on. So it's one of those ones that I would tend to find that everybody needs. I mean, I often get touted as somebody who eats incredibly well, and people go, I don't understand why you sort of take lots of supplements. I go, yes, because I know that my requirement is not met by my intake, even though I'm eating fantastically well. So the LLM1 is at your disposal, and depending on whether you have 1, 2, or 3 of those things that I've just mentioned, you could then take multiple doses over the course of the day. It's always better to take split doses of nutrients and make them omnipresent in your day, as opposed to taking one huge dose and then it just being sort of like worked through or not necessarily used properly. The thing about using liposomal supplements is they are not wasted, whereas capsules and liquids can be, because your body will just get rid of them if it doesn't use them immediately. But liposomals are uptaken and utilised slightly differently. But I still would progressively dose over the course of the day, just to give your body a little drip feed. And zinc is another one that, again, people don't tend to get as much as they need. Best food sources are things like lamb, shellfish, and you can get some from bits like pumpkin seeds. The thing about zinc is it's useful for your immune function. It's very important for men's health. But the easiest way to tell if your zinc status is low is to think about how well you taste, because zinc is really important for taste perception. So if you're somebody who loves mustards, pickles, really strong tasting foods, lots of chili, lots of salt, then it could be that it's not because you love them so much, but you actually can't taste the nuances of your food without them. So have a play around with that. You can actually get a zinc testing liquid, which you can order, and you basically fill it around your mouth, and depending on what you taste, you can then tell what your zinc status is. If you don't want to go and do a more in-depth blood test, but that would be my list of potential deficiencies, right? Right, okay, a couple more. Okay, anything here? I have chlorella powder, which shows a high level of vitamin D. Is that correct? It's vitamin D2, so it's not vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 is cholecalciferol, which is the active form that you would get from the sun. And if you ate something like organ meats, vitamin D2, I can't remember the actual scientific name for it because my brain has gone completely blank, but it would still need to be converted to vitamin D3. So again, this is one of those ones that if you say it's got 400% of your vitamin D requirements for the day, but it's in a vitamin D2 form, you're not going to get 400%. You might get 100, if that. You might not get any of it. So just knowing about the conversion things. Okay. Those were all just random numbers, by the way. I don't actually know what the active conversion of chlorella would be. Right, okay, so suitability of keto approach, where is it beneficial? Keto is one of those ones that if you do it and you really like it, then that's great, and you can get to terms with it, that's fine. But it's very limiting. It's 70% fat, 20% protein, 10% carbohydrates, or some people go 25% protein, 5% carbohydrates. The thing about that is all of your fruit and veg will fall under the carbohydrates. So you really start to nitpick as to where you're going to get your micronutrients from. Things like your antioxidants, your vitamins, your minerals, you're going to really struggle to fill those in. You're going to have to start adding in powders somewhere to make sure that you're getting them, or you're going to have somebody like me making sure that you are really keying in and getting a well-balanced, diverse diet within keto. It can be very useful for people who have issues with blood sugar balance. It's very useful for anything to do with nervous system hypersensitivity, because the nervous system loves glucose. And if you deprive it of glucose as an energy source, then you really stabilize things. Some people can find it's very helpful if they've got hormonal fluctuations and they need that blood sugar balancing element, but also to encourage fat metabolism. So I don't dislike keto. Again, it's just one of those ones that you can't be lazy with, and it is one that would leave quite large nutritional holes that need keen eyes on them to make sure that you're achieving things. You also can't come in and out of keto. You can't do keto for 4 days and then have 3 days off. This idea of, I don't subscribe to cheat days, because I think it just means that somebody is evidently eating in a way that doesn't support them from that whole nourishment perspective, because you should be able to love your diet and continue with it the whole time. But it takes a while to get in to a proper ketosis state where you're going to be burning ketones, and you can't just flick in and out of it. If you're flicking in and out, you're basically staying in a glucose metabolism the whole time, but just eating a lot of fat, which is not useful for you. Would nervous system sensitivity apply to fibromyalgia? It depends, because fibromyalgia can also be to do with toxin overload or mitochondrial failure. But in terms of managing chronic pain, yes, it would be. I mean, it does. A lot of people with fibromyalgia have been shown to have increased sensitivity of the nervous system, and also increased muscle of the nervous system and increased nerve fibers. So they are actually not just experiencing more pain; they actually sense more pain. They are more, and there is more pain transmission. So yes, I think that in that situation, a keto diet could be of benefit. You just need to make sure that they're also getting significant quantities of antioxidants, because that's the other side of it, to make sure that they're able to remove things from the body well. Because also fibromyalgia tends to come alongside something like chronic fatigue. They like to cluster together, which is not very nice. What is a safe way to supplement for all? I.e. can't overdose like magnesium versus what we have to be careful of, such as iron. Okay, so this is the quick run through, because I do need to finish this at some point. There are certain nutrients that you can store, so you'd have to be careful of, because you could get to a point when you're actually toxic. And there are certain ones which you're just going to use, and that's going to be fine. So anything like vitamin C, most B vitamins at a sort of standard dose, magnesium, those kind of things, you're fine. The ones that you want to be careful of are your fat-soluble vitamins, so A, D, E, and K, because they can be stored. B12 can also be stored, and iron can be stored. Zinc and copper. So you don't want to just do long-term high zinc supplementation because it shares a receptor site with copper. You need 15 times more zinc than copper. But if you're having, some things now talk about fertility with zinc and having ridiculous quantities, like 120 milligrams per day. If you do that, you're going to end up with a functional copper deficiency. But similarly, if you're having way too much copper and not enough zinc, you can then end up with issues with things like overmethylation and hormonal stuff because you need the zinc to balance out. I'm trying to think if there are any other examples of that. That's the main one. Oh, and iodine. I just wouldn't be supplementing huge swathes of iodine for a really long period of time because you only need small amounts. So things like your trace nutrients, so selenium, iodine, because they impact the endocrine system, so your hormones quite significantly. You just want to be careful of those. But I think they would be my top ones. What do I think of coenzyme Q10? I absolutely love it. I take it every single day. It's a brilliant antioxidant. Fantastic for things like the heart. Obviously, if anyone was taking any statins, they would need to take it every single day. But brilliant for for cognitive function. But also, if you are somebody like me, I exercise a lot. I need a lot of energy going into my cells and to also help step up the oxidative stress that's created when you exercise. So big thumbs up. And the LLQ1 is a really well absorbed form. So again, you can do 1 to 2 to 3 doses per day alongside a meal, depending on what you would need it for. Right, last questions, because we are coming up to an hour of me warbling on, and thank you all for joining. If anyone has any last things, do ask away. If not, I will wish you all a fantastic rest of your evening, day. More than my pleasure. Always thrilled to have you on board, Amy. And this will now be posted forever so that it can be rewatched too. Right, I'm heading off. See you next month, everyone. Bye.